Hi you guys, and welcome back. For those of you who don't know me personally, my name is Faith and I am a gardener here in North Florida, or what's otherwise called Zone 8B. I have dreamed of having a farm and garden all my life. I had the fortunate ability to grow up in a very little country town about 30 minutes outside of town. And just about everyone I knew either had some sort of small little garden or food or fruit trees or animals, and particularly the one person I can think of is my grandma. And every time we'd go to visit her, she always had a farm. She wrote for a homesteading magazine, and she had fainting goats and swans and a donkey and sheep, and she taught me how to milk and get chicken eggs and all of these things that she just basically kind of became my idol in that. And now that she got older in life, she had these raised beds and basically gifted me all the raised beds that you see here in my garden because she could no longer take care of them. But it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I finally took the plunge and purchased this property here, which is about 0.75 of an acre. So that I could actually have the opportunity to kind of start doing some of the things that I wanted to. This isn't my forever home, but I wanted to definitely have the opportunity to start growing my own food, maybe have a couple of chickens. I'm still dreaming about goats. I even have the names for them picked out already, and have for probably like the last 8 years. I'm just kind of crazy like that, and that just shows you how much I have wanted this and how long I've wanted this. But today I kind of wanted to do a beginner garden video and tell you how to start your garden if you, oh hello little beautiful, if you also have been dreaming of a garden and dreaming of this lifestyle, and just to help you along your own path. So today is kind of a beginner grower's guide for any sort of beginner gardeners. So I'm going to go over some of the basic things that you may want to be thinking about if you want to start a garden. Some of the things that I didn't know when I first started and maybe wish that I had known. So the first one is the location. So you probably can figure out, like, I don't know if you can see me, I'm in my garden right now. You want it in a very, very sunny location, especially if you're up in a northern climate where it's cooler. You're definitely going to want a lot of sun. Now, if you're here in Florida, by the summertime when it gets really, really hot, like it may be beneficial to have your garden where it gets some afternoon shade to kind of cool things off, because it can get a little bit too hot here, and kind of the garden season ends kind of in the summer here because it can get so hot. But on the other side of that, I have it in a really sunny location, and in the winter I can garden all winter long, which other places like up north don't get to do. So it has its ups and its downs. I got most of my garden in very early at the beginning of March, where not a lot of northern climate gardeners get to do. So it has its pros and its cons, but for most people, you're going to want your garden in a very, very sunny location. So that's kind of a basic one that most people probably know. Another thing you want to think about is the style of your garden and the type of garden that you want to have. So you can do raised beds, you can do in-ground gardening, you can do container gardening on your porch. I definitely, if you want to start a garden but you don't have the space for it yet, I know that was me for a really long time. I container gardened on my porch and around my apartment. You can actually do a pretty good bit, and I'm hoping to do a video of a little kind of container garden of like what I used to do when I was in my apartment to show. But even at my apartment, I didn't have very great sun, but I was still able to grow some basil and some herbs and things like that. So don't let where you're at stop you. You can still learn a lot even if you're just container gardening. You can do a kiddie pool and drill holes in the bottom. I've seen that, and fill that with soil. You can do grow bags. You can do basically like a plastic tub. I know a lot of people don't like plastic right now, but at least it would still be not a single use. You could reuse it over and over. Drill holes in the bottom of that, fill that with soil, and then grow out of that. So those are some options that you can do even from like a small location. If you're going to do sort of in-ground gardening, you would want to think about your soil and weeds and things like that a bit more. Like here I have kind of clay soil, but I don't know if you saw my last gardening video. I ended up having tomatoes that are doing much better in my ground soil with a little bit of compost than the ones actually in my garden bed. Which brings me to another thing, which is your soil. So soil is something that is going to be probably one of the most expensive things, unfortunately, in your garden. But it's something that you don't necessarily want to cheap out on entirely. Good organic soil, and just your soil in general, even if you're choosing not to be completely organic, it's going to make the most difference in your garden. That is basically the health of your plants and how they're going to do the best. It's based on your soil. And sometimes even if you're just getting, like, so I do raised beds here, and just getting them going, the plants, the tomatoes that are doing better in the ground, that soil has been there for years, kind of working over time, developing beneficial microbes and things like that. Whereas the raised beds that only have been here for a year, they haven't built up those microbes yet. So stuff like that makes a big difference in your soil. So you can do different seaweed fertilizer, compost tea with worm castings from like a worm casting compost bin, aloe vera feeds, different things that like that, mushroom compost, that really help build the soil in your garden and build the beneficial microbes. Maybe getting some worms and adding them actually to your soil so that they're kind of aerating the soil and building paths within your soil too. And another thing, speaking of soil, is how much water you're giving your plants. You want it to be moist, but not overly soggy. So the best way you can check for this is just to stick your finger in the soil and kind of see if it feels dry, if it feels moist. You don't want it too soggy because you want those roots to have a chance to breathe, but you don't want them to be too dried up and shriveled either. So generally you can see if the plants are kind of droopy and looking just like that you can either check the soil and either they don't have enough water and they're kind of looking puny because it's too hot and they're very dry, or from the opposite effect, they have too much water and need to dry out a little bit. So another thing that you want to think about in your garden is where you're located and what type of plants for your zone. So you'll often hear me, like even at the beginning of this video and other gardeners as well, talk about the zone that they're located in. And that's based on where you live in the region that you're in. So here in North Florida, I'm in zone 8B, and I can basically look that I'm in zone 8B and look up planting charts to figure out, okay, so it's December, what can I plant in December? Or it's starting to be spring, when should I start my spring seedlings so that I can plant them out in the spring, and I can determine my first and my last frost date, which I can know when my first or last frost is going to happen so that I can have my growing time in between that. And you can all figure out that based on your gardening zone and looking up what zone that you're located in and what plants can be started when for where you are. So that differs for everyone. I know for here, since I'm in North Florida and it's super hot here already, I was able to get my tomatoes out in like March, where a lot of people are just still even getting started on starting seeds, and definitely nowhere near to having, like, I already have tomatoes on some of my tomato plants where I can see the tomato growing. So that is just, but I will probably, my garden season will get cut short before the summer's over, where other people can kind of garden all summer, because here it'll just get too hot. So it all just depends on where you're located. So definitely check and look up your garden zone and kind of look at a growing guide to figure out kind of a basis of where to start. I wouldn't say that you need to be like religious by looking at that. Definitely be open to going outside of that and breaking the rules a little bit. You could be in some sort of little microclimate, or based on the shade and just based on where your garden is positioned, it can kind of, you might be able to push those boundaries a little bit. So don't be afraid of experimenting. And that's even why I was saying earlier with container gardening, you can still learn a pretty good bit by doing container gardening if you're not quite at the place where you can do an in-ground or raised bed gardening. So the last thing that I want to mention for you might want to think about when you're starting your garden is protection of your plants. You can probably see in any of my garden videos that I talk about having nets to cover my garden from my chickens. I do kind of a supervised free range for my chickens where I let them I come home from work and I let them kind of have free range of the garden and the yard while I'm out here. But what you may not know about chickens, if they're on your list but you don't have them, is they will eat your garden entirely down. They love those vegetables just as much as you do, and chickens will eat just about anything. So I have a lot of nets covering up my plants to keep them safe from my chickens. Not only that, there are a bunch of like cabbage moths and different things that will come and try to lay eggs on your plants, and then the worms will eat your plants. There's different types of pests for squash. You have like squash bugs and vine borers and things that could kill your cucumbers and your squashes, and there are just all sorts of pests you need to think about when you're organic gardening, especially because you're not using any sort of harmful chemicals or pest control in your garden. So thinking about protection is very important. Also, if you have been here kind of since the beginning, you'll notice that when I first planted out my tomatoes earlier on in the spring, it wasn't really past my frost date yet. That's one of the examples of me pushing the guidelines of where I'm at and kind of going outside of them. But what I did is that I put a frost protection over my tomatoes to kind of keep them covered and give them a little bit of protection until it warmed up enough. And I only had just a couple of nights where I had to worry about that. And so I was able to go ahead and plant them out because they needed to be planted. They were getting a little bit too big for the containers that they were in, and they were safe under the frost protection. Another thing that I really wish that I had known as far as protection is putting some sort of hardware cloth at the bottom of my raised beds. Now, I don't know how you would do that if you were in-ground gardening, but for the raised beds, if you have any sort of ground holes or ground things that travel through the ground that could come up and eat vegetables that way. I have times where I'll come out to the garden and I'll see plants completely, like the tops are completely chopped off, and I have the nets over it, and I know there's no way anything could have gotten in through the nets like my chickens, and I'm thinking, how in the world did that happen? And I'll see like in the ground there'll be a little spot where I can tell that something has come up through the ground, and I can see spots in my yard where I can tell something is traveling underground. And so if you put some sort of hardware cloth or some sort of wiring at the bottom of your bed before you fill it in with soil, it can really keep anything from being able to travel up and eat your plants. And just speaking on that, I would also, if you're doing raised beds and want to keep weeds out, I would definitely do a heavy duty sort of weed fabric protection so that you don't have to worry about weeds growing up through the bottom either. So basically those are all the things that I can think about for beginner gardening. I know here I'm just now kind of expanding into vertical gardening, which I think is going to really open up my potential growing space by being able to grow up vertically and then use the other areas. So that's something that you may want to think about. I'm not quite versed in that yet because this is my first time doing vertical gardening, but I will keep you updated on how I find that to be based on what I have done in the past. So anyways, I hope that's helpful. I'm going to continue on trying to do some videos that I think will be beneficial to the beginner gardener, and I hope to see you next time.